My son is Robert Haase. We call him Bobby. Bobby goes to Aldo Leopold School in Green Bay, Wisconsin. He's 12. He's got one sister, Brianna, and he's got a birth sister who donated bone marrow for him. Bobby's adopted. He was diagnosed at birth, AML leukemia. He had spots show up on his body about an hour after he was born, and they didn't recognize it at all. After a day of seclusion, they took a biopsy on one, sent it in, and a couple days later it came back as cancer. So that's when they sent us down to Children's Hospital in Milwaukee. The spots on his body disappeared a few days after we got down to Children's. Had we not had one tested, we would have never known he had cancer until it developed further. At Children's, they diagnosed it as AML, and we talked about options. Because he was only 5 days old, the options are somewhat limited as compared to an older person who gets it. But we started chemo at the age of 3 weeks, and when he was 4 months old, we had our first bone marrow transplant. He has a birth sister who was a perfect match. She was 7 years old and she wanted to donate, and she was a perfect match. They took bone marrow from her and transplanted it to Bobby when he was exactly 4 months old. That transplant took, but one of the issues we had was the cancer wasn't 100% gone. He would get injections into his spine once a month after that to try to take care of the rest. But when he turned a couple months before he was 2, a bump developed on his head, and it kept growing. So we brought him down here and they biopsied that, and it came back as cancerous again. Again, the cancer wasn't in his blood yet, but it was back. So at this point in time, AML is a type of leukemia where full body radiation is part of the normal protocol. So Bobby was given 9 doses of full body radiation over 3 days, as well as another full set of rounds of chemo in order to prepare him for a second bone marrow transplant. The doctors had the foresight with his first transplant that they had bone marrow in the freezer form. So they just had to pull the freezer bone marrow out, and he had a second transplant shortly after. I think it was on March 17th when he was just 2 years old. Since that transplant, he's been cancer-free. A lot of issues, a lot of ups and downs. The hospital was incredible. Julie Brown, one of the doctors, was telling me a couple of things that the MAC Fund was doing researching, and how we were trying to get bone marrow transplants, which is one of the things Children's Hospital is known, I think, definitely in the United States, if not worldwide, for kids. They're trying to stop things like graft versus host disease. You know, when you take your white blood count down to 0 and it's down there for 2 or 3 weeks, you could be susceptible to any disease. But then graft versus host, all of a sudden your body starts turning on itself and it starts fighting the actual bone marrow they gave you. The MAC Fund helps support that type of research so that when they do a bone marrow transplant, you have a better chance of not getting sick after the bone marrow transplant. I believe a lot of the money at the MAC Fund is going towards that type of research, and it's you know, you don't realize how much good is out there until you start experiencing it.